big power requires a lot of LiPo capacity, not just so that you can run your vehicle for a long time, but it acts as a cushion when a big power plant is sucking a lot of juice all at once. When you really punch it, you need a fairly deep fuel tank. Think of the voltage as octane and the milliamp hours as the capacity of your fuel tank. And when you hit the throttle, if you start sucking too much fuel all at once, okay, that's going to stress out the battery and start puffing it up and create more internal resistance, and then eventually that'll actually make your ESC run hotter. You wouldn't think that an old battery would make an ESC run hot, but it does. So dual batteries is a way to get the large capacity but distribute your weight around in a way that works for you. Now, when you're working with a small rig that's 4 pounds, 5 pounds, you know, and you're using a brushed motor that doesn't weigh very much and an ESC that doesn't weigh very much, weight distribution is relatively simple. But as you get bigger and bigger power plants, that becomes a significant chunk of weight. And once you beef up your transmission with solid steel gears and you use a metal case, that's a significant amount of weight. And it all gets located usually to one side or the other. So what happens is the vehicle, when it accelerates, it twists this way. Okay, the axles start spinning, they encounter resistance, the differential, and that spinning shaft makes the vehicle want to twist this way. Well, the way this particular vehicle is set up is the motor happens to be on the side where it twists, which is not ideal, obviously. So I can counteract that by putting one battery as far over to the side as possible in the center. Okay, and because I've got a big heavy transmission and a big heavy motor and a big heavy ESC and a big heavy front axle, it's all beefed up, I've got a ton of weight from about here forward, which is not ideal. So I can put my other battery back here as low as possible to stretch the weight towards the back a little bit and balance the vehicle out. And the countering of torque twist isn't just done with weight distribution. You have to run springs of slightly different weight, and what I've found works for this particular setup, because it's so heavy in the front, is to run really stiff springs in the front, and they're under pre-tension, okay, because these shocks are shorter than the springs were intended for. So the springs are actually under load right now. And inside I have a little helper spring that runs from here to there, just on the heavy side, on the side where the motor lives. You can see, well, maybe you can't, but there's a motor, a giant motor up in here. There you go. There you see it. It's a giant heavy can, weighs about 10 ounces. Now, on this side, I have the same heavy pre-stressed spring, but no helper. Okay, that's because it's not as heavy on this side. And this counters the torque twist. It also limits travel by about 5 millimeters, so this side will not go down as far. In the back, what I found is that if you run your shocks too soft in the back, you get a lot of roll. And so I've got a little bit of pre-tension. These are long travel shocks, but I've got almost the same amount of pre-tension now here as I do back there, because that's about how much shorter that shock is in the front. So I'm running about the same tension all the way around, and I've got the same tension on each side within just a smidge. I have just a couple more threads showing on this side than this side on the heavy side, but not as aggressive as I did in the front. And what that does is it counters the torque twist, but it doesn't push the vehicle over so much that it looks crazy where it's leaning to one side. And because all the shocks are equally sprung, when you're steering and at speed and stuff, it's more predictable. And when you hit the throttle, you don't get a huge amount of body roll. All right, so that's a little bit about setting up your weight distribution, your batteries, and your shocks and springs for a shaft-driven vehicle. Now, if your vehicle's a lot lighter than this, about 10 pounds, it's a lot easier to do. But once it gets heavier and heavier, it gets really uncontrollable unless it's properly suspended. And one way to tell if something's working good is you drop it from about a foot and you see what happens. Does it bounce? Just hit the ground and go. You should hit the ground and go like that. Recycle, just cycle one time. If it's bouncing more than that, you need to use thicker oil in your shocks and slow it down a little bit, because you don't want oscillation, because what happens is oscillation turns into unpredictable forward motion, and then you can end up off track or rolling. Alright, thanks for watching, guys.